接下来我们有请沈佳为大家带来 Beyond Translation, giving your agents a native Japanese soul with Shisa LLM. Welcome, Mr. Shen Jia.
Hi, nice to see everybody. I'm going to use English. My Chinese is okay, but 我中文也 OK， 就是介绍像技术这些东西，我就是还是用英文比较方便吧。So my name is Jia. I'm originally from the U.S. and this is Shisa AI. I've been in Japan for about 15 years now, and so as a long-term gaijin in Japan, the solution, the problem we're trying to solve is very close to a problem I understand, right? Which is being here for so long, you still understand where there's a lot of difficulty to understand the Japanese culture. Our team is a team that's working on intuitive AI for Japan. So it's me, Leonard Lim's a friend that I've known for like 20 plus years. He sold his first company to Yahoo, and then he's basically been working. He's basically a chief scientist. And then my brother, who's also here, is also basically in charge of our product. So the funny story is, our company is called Shisa, and it's the two dogs from Okinawa. The two dogs are actually very representative of what our company is because, if you know the Shisa dogs from Okinawa, they're actually like the basic mascots are actually both from China and from Japan, and so that's actually really cool. They also basically represent kind of like a bicultural thing, and also represent kind of like the birth that basically me and my brother, and so there's a lot of fun things about that. So why are we just doing, what does it mean to be doing AI in Japan? We are focusing on something very, very specific. We're focusing on Japan as a core crux of LLM training and tool sets and product sets given to Japan. The thing about Japan, which is really, really interesting, is that in 2011, Japan's English proficiency compared to the rest of the world was still okay. But the big thing is that the rest of the world has gotten better at English, and Japan's gotten worse at English. Even though English is actually one of their biggest business partners in the world. And so this is very, very recent data. And what's really interesting is that kind of on the bottom left here I show Japan's become more and more focused just about Japan, very isolationist, and they're basically really about Japanese culture. And second is the workforce is getting older, and with that, there's just less people that are learning English over time because of the shrinking young population. And then the other funny thing about Japanese culture is that they basically maybe they're okay at Japanese, but they don't use it very often because they don't want to express English unless they basically feel like they're at a decent, strong level. This one is also pretty surprising for me when I first saw this. But Japan is the lowest user of OpenAI, or AI in general, per capita in the, and kind of all the big countries, right? If you compare China, US, Germany, Japan, especially in the non-business world, very few people use GPT. This data obviously is a little bit old, but this is August 2025, and this data over here is basically March of 2025. And in March of 2025, basically Japanese people only 1% of Japanese people use GPT on a daily basis. Now the number is higher, but still it's just much, much lower than anywhere in the world. And this is an important thing to realize when everybody in this room probably is developing AI products every single day like crazy, and just understand that if you're targeting the Japanese market, their core understanding and their core adoption of AI is actually a little bit different, right? Because they're still very careful about how they want to adopt things. And so this is, every time I look at it, it's still very surprising, but just realize the people that you meet isn't necessarily representative of the entire Japanese population, because Japan is still 130 million people. Most of the people that you meet is only one subset of the people that are actually in Japan. And so this is one of the things we call out for why we've been focused on Japanese since the beginning. It's a little bit of background, we actually come from the gaming and entertainment space. And so for gaming, we mostly look at more for instance, anime and gaming conversations or literature-based conversations. And so they're a little bit different than the business conversations. And in those situations, it becomes a lot more obvious when translation isn't actually as good because it's actually just kind of more niche, more kind of cultural about it. But this slide is actually really important because I don't think it's controversial. Like AI right now is being trained by Americans and Chinese people, generally. And those two languages are, English and Chinese are actually very, very similar, right? Basically, I love you, well, I love hamburger, well, I hambao, or whatever. Like that stuff is like, in one sentence, when you do a language pair, it's pretty obvious, right? You're like, you know, you love a hamburger, and that's pretty clear. But in Japanese, everybody knows that they say a bunch of things, and then they might basically finally just say a sentence that has no subject or no, basically nothing about the detail. They'll just say suki desu, no, aishiteru, or so on and so forth. And so before the training systems and people that were building these things, they were trying to shrink the context. And so your translation obviously didn't work out very well, right? That's obviously been solved mostly because everything is gigantic context these days, but it really points out that if you're coming from a culture of English or Chinese, you might be missing certain things of how you're actually making the tool sets and how you're making the training data for things. So the more fun part about it is like, this is more detail about where the context aspect of it becomes harder. Like, so like, I love something, that's generally, if you flip one sentence back, more so, it gets okay. But Japanese makes it even harder, right? Because we all know about Keigo and all sorts of context stuff, but it's actually like way harder, right? Because it's like if you, if you've been in Japan long enough, everybody knows about like gaijin smash. We can just, or if your Japanese is terrible, they just assume that you didn't mean it. But if your Japanese gets good enough, you all of a sudden get caught in where you can make certain mistakes, and the mistakes could cost you business. So this is just really highlighting where Japanese people basically say less. They really just say less and mean a lot more, and so that makes translation and everything else about it much harder, right? And so this has become a huge difficult thing for us to build out our overall AI models, and that's where these are highlighting why the problem is actually more difficult than just basically OpenAI or like DeepSeek's just going to go and throw a bunch of data at the problem, because the key pieces are they're not looking at all the data, and they're not getting the reinforcement data from the Japanese people, which is a big piece, right? Like if you think about it, the RL data that's being given to like the international systems, like actually Japanese people don't give that feedback. They're just like, oh, okay, this sucks, and they just don't say anything. And that's one of the big pieces why it still needs more improvement. So a little bit about us. The core company does a bunch of products, but this is kind of a timeline of all of our AI models that we put out in the past. So we've had our Shisa V1 back in 2023. It was our first model, tiny model, but very powerful. It was the best benchmark at the time. We put out a 14 billion as well. But we can fast forward to like, kind of today, and these are the open source models. We have our proprietary models as well. So it's a little bit small, but we got our big one, basically the 405B. This was a GENIAC round 2 back project. It is the best benchmarked and then basically the largest parameter trained model in Japan up until this point. The cool part though is that our V2 on these little small guys over here you can't really see, those are actually much smaller models. We've got like basically 30 billion to 70 billion. Those are a lot easier to run on affordable compute. And so we offer those models. They're also open source. You can also host them locally. And they are now basically post-trained in a way they're almost just as strong as the 405 billion now. And so they're very useful for all sorts of, not just translation, they're actually benchmarked across the board. Everything from like basically instruction following, coding, and obviously translation language and so on and so forth. But this is kind of like our current set of models. And the V2 one, the Shisa V2 models actually are, I think, like 7 models. They're basically post-trains on like Quent, Llama, Mistral, Microsoft Phi, and so on and so forth. So if you're using any of those models and you are working with the target Japanese market, you should consider looking at the Shisa models as well. And this is kind of our broader overall like API business. I should probably come back to this in more detail, but the API side, if you guys aren't looking at what we're doing here, we're running real-time translation for this event. But that software piece is actually, that software piece is using all of our different products. So if you think our UI isn't good enough, you can take all the different pieces that we have, the speech recognition, and then the translation piece, and then you can build your own if you want to. I should have a slide about the speech recognition, but real quick, our speech recognition model is a new model that just came out. Most everybody here probably uses something like Whisper, Open Whisper, or whatever. And the problem with those models is that they are not steerable. So you basically can't say, oh, by the way, I want it to basically know this terminology, or I want you to basically transcribe in a different way. It's not an LLM model, it's actually a machine learning model. Our model, you can prompt it, you can tell it to transcribe differently, just as fast and just as performant. It also supports Kansai dialect, and then we're adding new dialects all the time. So it's actually a new ASR model. I don't think there's anything else out there quite like it. And so if you're building anything to be able to transcribe Japanese speech, you should definitely look at our ASR. These are the rest of our businesses. I won't get into much detail about that, but we basically do translation across the entire stack for Japanese businesses. You guys are probably looking at ChotoChat. This is our consumer product. Smartphone version is coming out soon. It's basically really good for real-time translation for any type of situation. You can have 50 people in the same room. It does Chinese, English, Japanese right now, and you can technically do, most of the Romance languages like French, Italian, Spanish, so on and so forth. And if you don't know how to get to it, it's actually really easy. It's just choto.chat. The kind of joke, if you know, is that if you've been in Japan long enough, people are always like, oh, if you speak a little bit of Japanese, it's also always like, Nihongo jozu ne. So the other one is like, if people ask you, Nihongo hanashimasu ka? I mean, everybody's like, chotto dake. That's why choto.chat. So good. Okay, now back to the main topic. So, you saw Choto Chat, and a lot of times, especially from my American friends, they're always like, oh, why don't I just use Google Translate? And Google Translate's fine if you want to ask where the bathroom is and how much this t-shirt is, but beyond that, you basically sound like a robot, basically. And so the main thing that we were saying is that, we've noticed is that, translation in a deep way is it's actually really, really hard, almost impossible to do it in a way where you are a foreigner trying to speak to a Japanese person, but in a very deep contextual way. The example that I always say is it's really hard for me to talk to somebody if I didn't speak the same language about my hobbies. But harder is that it's hard to tell a joke, right? A joke is the hardest one because there's a lot of cultural references, there's a lot of cultural words behind that, and then being able to read the room, be able to like a kukiyome with a joke, is actually super, super hard on how to deliver that type of stuff. No AI can do that yet. We're trying to basically, that's kind of an interesting gold standard to be able to do something like that, to be able to cross that boundary, right? But if you look at these examples that we have here, which is really about just setting the right tone for whoever you're talking to, it's very, very important to, at least as an AI, be able to train and follow these different types of difficulties for it. This one, I think, is the most important lesson for at least a lot of international AI companies, especially American ones. We've all gone to for instance the OpenAI events, or the Anthropic events. And I'm from Silicon Valley, and Silicon Valley is very much about fail fast, right? So you basically want to iterate quickly, ship product fast, and then learn from your mistakes, and then improve your product. That's how all the big, greatest companies have come out from. But the problem with Japan, especially with communication, basically what we've realized, even in our own sales process, basically, if you make a mistake, that's super, super bad. Basically, they basically have lost kind of general brand trust. And this is where it gets really tough for AI, because the biggest problem with AI is it's really, really smart, but it hallucinates. And if you hallucinate, and if you don't protect yourself from hallucinations to the end customer in Japan, they won't understand why. They're just like, what is this thing here, right? Basically, if your AI is kind of dumb, that's okay. If it makes a mistake, that's where it's kind of like pretty much a death sentence for at least an enterprise product, right? And so this is why, for us, like we say that we're going to go into, for instance, like legal translation and medical translation and so forth. Both those are examples of mission critical translation. But even in normal business translation, if you make kind of a terminology mistake, you're generally being judged in a pretty deep way. And so this is a very important point for go-to-market in Japan. And so for us, like, it's actually better to be slower or stupider than to make mistakes. So for us, it's like basically protection and safety layers are much more important for our infrastructure for stuff that we build out. This other point is something that we call out. This is something that obviously our LLMs are very, very strong at. And this is something where I think probably everybody in this room speaks 2 languages or more. And so we kind of have a bias. And so, but you don't really realize whether translation is good in a bi-directional way. You're probably stronger at one language than the other. And what's really interesting, and this is effective even to like GPT-5 and all the big models, is that obviously it's better at translating one direction versus another, right? So for instance, even our model, our model needs to get better at basically Chinese to Japanese translation. But you can see how we're basically benchmarking in a very, very important way where like models that a lot of people like to use are actually really, really bad in the other direction. And so this is really an important piece for people to pay attention to, because we always look at different products from our kind of like our kind of the way that we see things. Because I'm fundamentally American, I've been in Japan for a long time, but when I have Americans when they come here, they basically think that Google Translate's amazing because they don't see the other side and that it's not an important point. They can't realize it, and they don't get any feedback from the Japanese side when they're basically getting the interpretation, because it's like barely good enough. But this is where it's an important piece for us. We have a huge suite of benchmarks internally, and the benchmarks like for different verticals, everything from like basically drinking and dating to basically manufacturing to basically like live streaming, fighting games or whatever. And those benchmarks are important for us to basically be able to create and basically measure the quality of that in every single direction, right? So that problem gets more difficult as you add more languages because it becomes kind of a graph problem. But fundamentally, being able to measure that across bi-directional pieces is actually something that most people don't pay attention to, because generally there's an engineer behind there and saying, oh, okay, I've passed the Japanese benchmark. But it's actually not good enough. Right? And so these are kind of like public models that a lot of people use. And we actually publish a lot of this data out there. And so anytime a new model comes out, we actually run benchmarks across that. This is more about how the benchmarking is being applied specifically across like more difficult, like large context problems. We're not trying to pick on the smaller models here, but the big piece is that the smaller models, they do break, especially from the Japanese side of things, because they're basically trying to squeeze much more power in a much more smaller context. And this is where benchmarking on those aspects of it are very, very important. This is a key thing for us. Actually, this slide doesn't really call it out, but because we have a bunch of different models, and we have the ability to fine-tune much smaller models too, right? So, obviously the liquid AI model right there is it's like a 2.6 billion. It's tiny, right? I think I have a 1 billion one too that can fit on like a calculator basically. And to be able to do those type of models, it's important to be able to have the infrastructure to do the post-training, as well as the benchmarking to be able to fit in that same type of parameter size. So a key lesson for us is that you could do kind of OpenAI and ChatGPT or whatever. It's kind of a very generic interface, right? And that's kind of the superpower of it. Everybody can use it in a bunch of different ways. It's almost like your best friend. One of the big go-to-market lessons that we've learned too is to make products very specific to individual use cases. And so if you've been in Japan long enough, every single type of restaurant or bar or service is actually very, very structured and siloed. They don't do everything at the same time, except for maybe Don Quixote or whatever. And so for us, it's really been about creating individual products for deep cultural translation in every single situation. And that's why we have, the one basically for the interpersonal, but on the business side, it's really about the easy ones first, every Slack and email, and the meeting summarization. Oh, it's just not in here. Oh yeah. But one of our most important ones that we've been working on is email composition. Anybody that's learned Japanese knows that writing a Japanese email is one of the important things to learn, and it's not something that it's basically a skill set altogether, right? And so that's an example of a dedicated tool set of being able to write business emails, respond to business emails, understand the context of the entire business email chain, and then being able to basically maintain your right level of respect, and then be able to still sound like your native Japanese speaker. And so these are different aspects of what kind of really targeted tool sets that we're building out to make sure that it hits the different requirements for it, right? So the two latest ones is obviously conference calls is where we spend a lot of time doing R&D, but we've gotten into more difficult situations where we're actually doing board meeting translations. And so board meetings obviously have two problems. One is confidential information. Second is just highly financial and technical terminology. And so those are other examples where we can't make mistakes, and we also need to make sure that terminology-wise really has to be accurate, very accurate. We still have trouble with making sure, kind of multiple capture for numbers, right? So we actually do multiple passes on it to make sure that we basically understand that the translation and transcription is accurate. Another important thing, this actually is something that actually I didn't realize either. This is where AI makes mistakes that are generally not forgivable for Japanese businesses, and Japanese models are actually huge. So token leakage, we published a big paper on this. I think it's like a 40-page paper about token leakage across the board on all AI models. And token leakage, if you don't know what that is, I did not know what it was, is basically when you're doing a translation to another language, it leaks a third language, or basically the language that it's not supposed to translate to. Right? And so we've got a bunch of examples here. But the easiest one to make mistakes on is that instead of kanji, it's Chinese, right? Which is, for most people, you won't be able to see the difference. But even at a Unicode level, it actually technically is broken when they're doing that translation piece. And the error rate actually on most large models out there is huge, actually. Actually, this doesn't list the models out, but basically these are like frontier models. They're like leaking 2 to 10%. That means basically 1 out of 10 translations has a non-Japanese character in it. And for most people, it looks pretty good. But if you're doing kind of document translation, financial translation, and basically just really important corporate aspects of it, that is a very big piece of it. And so this is where even the big models out there, token leakage is a gigantic problem, and that's one of the things that we do a whole ton of post-training on. This is where kind of philosophically, she says about making sure you make less mistakes as opposed to making great translation is good, but less mistakes or basically no mistakes is the important bar for us to do for localization for Japanese. And this, like I said, there's a big paper out there, lots of data on that, and then you can also use the stuff that we published to also go and benchmark other models, and you can kind of see how we're trying to evaluate this problem. So this gets more into the fun part. So this is just calling out individual verticals that we have as a company are going after. So like I said, we come from the gaming and entertainment space, so we have clients that are in the gaming space where they're doing live streaming. We got VTubers. We talk about medical and legal a little bit, but that's something that we're not doing yet. But then you can see where, even with the kind of the frontier models out there, it's really a lot of it's more of a data problem more than anything. It's solvable, but if you're not focused on it, then you won't be ready to kind of address it. And so we have a very non-sexy way of doing this right now. Obviously, the AI model itself is all inclusive, it's very much endpoint to endpoint. But we do a lot of basically additional layers to make sure that we're doing things as accurately as possible. And so this is really about our overall fine-tuned models, and we have lots of fine-tuned models for individual verticals. We talk about the 6 here, like esports, automotive, et cetera, et cetera. But on top of that, after the model is being used, then we have another system that's basically doing additional context and additional correction to make sure that we finally have a translation that actually is accurate. Hopefully this describes it a little bit better, but from a model standpoint, basically we take the translations, we do it basically a source language correction, and then basically after it's translated, it does a target language translation. It'll become more obvious when we're going to go into the individual verticals, but this is a really important piece for my actually favorite 2 examples are, well, my first example is easy, it's Pokemon. And Pokemon, obviously I forgot my names, but like, and the Pokemon names in Japanese and in English and in Chinese, actually, they're all entirely different, right? And so, and you could do basically, obviously, a dictionary lookup for these type of things, but some of them are actually word for word, and so when somebody's saying like Pikachu and whatever, obviously, and when it basically translates over to the US, it's the same thing, but like for instance, like Snorlax, which is like Kabe? I forgot his name, but that piece, that translation requires like individual specifics for it. Obviously, in today's models, that stuff is all present, but the problem that the gaming companies are coming up with is because, for instance, new games are coming out all the time, and so they want to basically launch the new game. They want basically esports and influencers and everybody else to be able to talk about those things, and they're running into a huge problem. Right? So one of the problems we've run into is a new game coming out, 8,000 new words, and that's not in any of the models out there. Right? So that's something that's like, okay, our system is actually designed to take that new vocabulary and basically be able to localize that and basically roll that out in a new model, within a week. So FGC is basically a fighting game community. This is the community that we're closest to, actually. Obviously with esports, they're actually new fighting games. Fighting games are back, and they're coming out in a big way. They're big kind of on a global stage. There's everybody from obviously the US to, Saudi Arabia's got a kind of like what do they call it, the World Cup of esports now, and being able to handle deep terminology and translation for games to not just Japanese to English, but other kind of dialects that basically don't have proper localization for the terminology. That's a big place for us to go. And so examples, and even like kind of the frontier models don't handle a lot of this that well, is because these are a lot of these are terminology that's more like slang. The slang that's not actually even officially kind of built into the game. Those pieces are important for us to make sure that these things are as accurate as possible. What's fun about our application that we're working with this one is that, the esports like live streamers, they talk differently, I guess is the best way to say it. That's everything from a speech model to how they enunciate, and then all of that is important for us to kind of like be able to collect the data and then build new models to be able to transcribe and translate for. This one's a fun one, because this is one of the games that just has a gigantic vocabulary, right? And the translation piece for this, actually, if you use even kind of the frontier models, like does not handle, especially the monster names and all the different types of kind of armor that they have in the system. It's actually not good for it, right? So this is where, for us, building out kind of custom models and correction systems is important to allow for like proper localization and translation. I will skip most of the other things, but like medical translation, obviously, is something that we're not getting into just yet. And medical translation is, of course, mission critical. So if you make a bad translation, people die. But the other piece is that translation also has to take into account understanding of regulation, what medicine is available and not available, and that basically different types of medicine are basically named differently because of different providers in different countries, right? So it's actually very hospital and very basically locale specific, and it's not just kind of a direct translation piece of it. So this is something that we're aware of and something that we want to tackle, but this highlights where kind of domain specialization for translation is wildly important. This is really more for everybody to read, but the legal context is obviously pseudocode, and it's kind of like, this is where LLMs generally are much stronger at, but this just kind of like highlights where basically a specialized translation to make sure that you are translating it in a very, very accurate form is very, very important. And so this has a lot of other kind of tooling and layer sets that we have to build on top of it, but you can see where just kind of word choice is very different for every type of context. And then the final one, this is the one that we know best, is basically live streaming and VTubing. And this is actually where we got started. But this is a form of terminology that it highlights the most important thing about what translation is about. Translation is all about data, because culture is always evolving. And then the forefront of cultural evolution is definitely like online live streaming, and VTubing is definitely a part of that, because every new influencer actually has their own like fan base and own fan vocabulary, and all those types of things are important for the translation to be able to also accentuate and kind of adapt with it, right? Because imagine if you're a Japanese live streamer trying to build a US base, your fan base vocabulary is evolving in real time. The system needs to be able to adapt and be able to translate that for an international audience, and then needs to be able to take all that and feedback into the system. And so this is kind of where we got started, but it's actually also one of the it's the most difficult problem, more difficult problem just because it evolves so quickly, but also this audience is more forgiving about the translation piece of it, right? So this is a great place for us to have been sandbox experimenting with how kind of real-time translation has worked. And so that really kind of like highlights most of the kind of like philosophy about how we go about kind of translation and verticals. And you guys should just like take notes about how you potentially want to go look at this. This is, even with our models, it's important to take any type of AI model and apply kind of like this deeper philosophical form to apply at individual verticals. You can use a big frontier model or use our model, but you still have to give it the context of basically what situation it's in. You should let it know what the general vocabulary and slang that it should be using. You shouldn't be doing the translate to the Japanese prompt and then that's it, because that won't get it to the right level that you need. And so if that's why it's like about building the right models, then understand from a workflow standpoint how to build out proper translation pieces so that basically the end products that you have are actually the most accurate, make the least mistakes, and kind of get the whole kind of cultural piece across. That's basically that's a conclusion about kind of what we do at Shisa. The final two pieces really is about, since our models are mostly open source and even our proprietary ones can be done on-premise and hosted, we are getting close to our Microsoft Azure version so that you guys can actually just download and basically operate them on Azure infrastructure. And if you guys want basically more detailed fine-tunes for something that's specifically for your vertical, we can help you guys with that. And this is more about, as a team, we're obviously getting quite a bit of coverage, in Japanese media. We're really trying to integrate ourselves to basically showcase that, we're an AI team that's really pushing for kind of a model that's developed in Japan, for Japan. And that's basically that. Our APIs are available. If you guys go to talk.shisa.ai, you can basically log in right now, and then you can get a free API key. This is API keys for, right now it's limited time, but you can access basically all the LLM models. You can you can get the speech recognition model. We actually have our speech models too, and then we have the translation model, and so you can play with all those. We should really have a demo for it, but like basically maybe in 5 minutes, you can basically get a character talking in Japanese with an English input, basically all through our API code. And so that's us, Shisa AI. And if you guys are doing anything for the Japanese market, you should consider looking at our products. Thank you.